So I often start with a black wash to age the rocks first. So that's just straight black acrylic paint mixed with some water, either spray it on in a pump spray bottle or paint it on with paintbrush, and then hit extra sections with a little bit extra water to sort of blend it out a bit so you get heavier in some areas, lighter in others. That's usually where I start to give it an aged look, and then I just use a dry brush method.
So what I did with my enclosure is I just filled it as high as I possibly could with that dirt, with the black soil, poured buckets of water in there, and then put heat lights like every 20 centimeters or so along it and left it for about 3 months.
Welcome to episode number 91 of the Animals at Home podcast. My name is Dylan Perrin. Thank you so much for tuning in today. So today I'm speaking with Kristy Jensen and Matt Summerville. They are both Australian keepers and they operate and run the YouTube channel, the Natural Herp Keeper. Now, Kristy and Matt started the Natural Herp Keeper YouTube channel only back in October of 2020. I think they only have about 8 videos so far, and they already have over 1,000 subscribers. And their first video has over, I think, 40,000 views, which is incredibly impressive. Now, the reason for all of these views and all the people following them is because they have really incredible content. Their name, Natural Herp Keeper, is exactly what it sounds like. They show people how to make their enclosures naturalistic and natural looking, and they are honestly one of the best out there in my opinion. They both are zookeepers at an Australian zoo, so that gives them a ton of foundation as far as natural replication goes, and they've brought that into their private collection and private keeping, and they are here on their own YouTube channel as well as on the podcast today to explain some of those tactics they use to make their enclosures look so amazing. So in the episode, we do discuss their backgrounds of zookeeping and what it's like working at a reptile zoo, but then we really dive into the techniques that they use to make their enclosures so amazing. So that goes from the fake rock work to the replicating natural substrates, and not even just replicating natural substrates, but the appearance of natural substrate, which is a whole other ball of wax, and Matt really takes us into that, and Kristy explains how she makes the rocks look so real. So we do get into that, and then we discuss herping trips that they go on in Australia, and really the importance of seeing some of those natural habitats in the wild in person and how that impacts your keeping at home. So this conversation will give you a good taste of what they're capable of, but of course go to their YouTube channel to see the full instructional videos for how they're doing what they do. Now, if you are a patron, you know that I did talk about last week about potentially mixing in, and maybe you noticed on the last episode, mixing in some more visual elements on the YouTube version of the podcast. Now, if you're listening to this on audio, it will not impact your listening experience at all. However, if you do want to go back to the YouTube video when you do have a chance, you may want to scrub through the video because I will be pasting just photos that I stole from Matt's Instagram and Kristy's Instagram, as well as the Herp Keeper YouTube channel. I did ask, so I didn't really steal. They gave me permission to do that, but they are pasted within the conversation. So those do pop up from time to time. Or if you're listening to this on audio, I just recommend go check out Matt and Kristy's Instagram, as well as the Natural Herp Keeper Instagram page, as well as on YouTube. Obviously, that's where you'll see all of that content. So if you are interested, or if you are starting to notice more visual content, that is why I figured I would mix that in. Let me know if you like that. I hope that you guys do. I assume you do. It does add a little bit of editing time, but I assume it makes the video a little more interesting to watch. Other than that, thank you very much to CustomReptileHabitats.com for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. As always, affiliate links are in the YouTube description as well as the show notes. Show notes can be found at AnimalsAtHomeNetwork.com. Just click on the Animals at Home podcast and there you'll find the episode tile. And if you're not following me on Instagram, feel free to follow me there at AnimalsAtHomeCA. I do answer all my DMs there, so if you want to reach out and say hi, that is the place to do that. And of course, if you want to join us on Patreon, you can head to patreon.com/animalsathome. Let's jump into this episode. Enjoy. Well, Matt and Kristy, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
I really appreciate you joining me. You guys have one of those really hidden gem YouTube channels out there, and as well as both of your respective Instagram accounts are really great to look at for any animal lovers out there. But your YouTube channel especially has all these great tips and amazing keeping, and I think us over here in this part of the world love talking to Australian keepers as well, because you guys, there's always nice to hear a different perspective. But let's chat a little bit about your background. So maybe we'll start with Kristy. Where did the love for animals come from? Was that always here, or do you remember anything specific when you were younger, or how did this start?
I think it's always been here. So I spent a lot of my younger years growing up in Cape York, so right up in the very tip of Australia, out in the bush. I lived in mining camps and the like. So we spent most of my childhood in the bush, running around, surrounded by animals. We were always out camping. We've travelled a lot of Australia in the back of a four-wheel drive as kids, and just always had that real love of being outside, of animals. I can't really even remember a time when I wasn't into nature or animals. It's just part of who I was growing up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's kind of the common story. What about for Matt? What about yourself?
Pretty much the stereotypical kid that loved dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Obsessed with dinosaurs as a kid, and then it just branched on to other animals. Reptiles were always the favorite, but I was always into like birds, mammals. I kept a lot of fish as a teenager as well, and always outside catching like little Lampripholus, little garden skinks in the yard, and little hatchling bearded dragons, and putting them in fish tanks, and had no idea what I was doing with them most of the time. And then it sort of just progressed and stemmed from there. And yeah, I never grew out of it.
So as far as keeping goes for the both of you, what were some of the first reptiles you kept? I guess you can continue on with what you were saying, Matt, and then we'll jump over to Kristy.
I did catch like little bearded dragons, which you're not supposed to do, and kept them in fish tanks with like a desk lamp over the top, and wondered why they never grew and that type of thing.
Yeah.
But the first like proper pet reptile I got was a coastal carpet python.
Nice.
I can't even remember how old I was when I got that, but I was young. And it just sort of progressed from there. I had a coastal, and then I got a water python a few months later, and before I knew it, I had dozens and dozens of snakes.
The classic snowball.
Yes.
And Kristy, what about you?
Yeah, I think very much the same. Instead of bearded dragons, it was like little Tommy Roundheads that we'd catch up in the bush. And again, they were in a little fish tank out the back of the house. I was probably only 6 or 7 when we started catching those sort of things. But then living in some of the remote areas that I didn't actually get back into keeping them and actually having an actual pet reptile probably until I was like in my late teens, like 18 or something, and started with bearded dragons, got the standard obsession with them. And then, yeah, like Matt, it just sort of snowballed from there.
So then for both of you, you both have a career. Are you both working at a zoo, or you both have worked at a zoo? Yeah, you both.
Yeah,
so
both.
Was that always as a childhood goal, working in a zoo? Was that both of what you wanted to do from kind of day one?
Not really. For me, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I usually wanted to do something with animals, but I went down a few different career paths before I actually ended up back at working with animals, it is. I just started as a volunteer at the local park like 12 years ago or something now, 12 or 13 years. I started volunteering just for something to do to broaden my knowledge on reptiles, and then before I knew it, was working in there, and I haven't looked back. It's been 10 plus years employed with them now.
Wow. And for Matt, was it sort of the same sort of story?
Same thing. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be involved in animals, but at the same time, I thought I would never actually get into the industry. And what happened with me is I did a few jobs that I hated once I finished school. And then I started working, like catching snakes and other reptiles for the mining industry, which I also hated. And then I sort of just fell into the zoo industry. I was one of those people that got really lucky and just applied for a job when it came up, got in with no volunteer work or anything like that. And I'm 8 years in now and wouldn't change it at all. Best thing I ever did.
So just jumping back to that mining thing, that's interesting. Was that just clearing out animals from working areas?
Sort of clearing areas for mines and gas pipelines. Obviously, lots of animals fall in trenches and get into machines. So it was just our job to remove those animals. And it's more ticking a box for the government than anything else. Say that they're actually making a difference. But once you watch it all the time, you realize they're not making a difference.
Yeah, they're still tearing up the landscape with a pipeline. It's not
yeah, it was a very depressing job.
Yeah, I bet. So are you both at the same zoo then, or is that where you met, or you guys both at the same place? Can you tell us a little bit about where you are at?
Yeah, okay. So we're at Hartley's Crocodile Adventures. So we live in Cairns. Hartley's is located about 15, 20 minutes north in Wongetti. It's the largest wildlife park up here. We originally both started at Cairns Tropical Zoo, which was down in Cairns, owned by the same people. There was a merger about 5 years ago, and we shifted up there. So currently I'm the wildlife supervisor up there. So I've moved out of reptiles and look after all areas of the park now. Reptiles is obviously my passion and my forte. Matt's taken over the reptile section now, so he actually manages that.
And what sort of, maybe we'll just stay on you for a second, Kristy. You can, because you have some interesting pictures on your Instagram. What are some of the other animals other than reptiles that you're sort of watching over?
The whole park. So at the moment, I'm currently hand raising our little wombat, Joey, Warren. So that's something brand new for me. I usually specialise in flying foxes. So I do that as a wildlife rescue sort of organisation as well. But yeah, at the moment, I've got the wombat. So it's very, very different to anything I've hand raised before. But I look after all the different birds, mammals, so kangaroos, koalas, we've got heaps of those guys, and of course all our native birds as well.
Mm. And then Matt, you have the reptile focus. What are some of the species that you're working with?
We've got a fairly large collection, but some of the standouts for me, Komodo dragons are the best one I've ever worked with. Best reptile, hands down.
He's the best animal in the park, that lizard.
Yeah, he is the best animal.
What makes him the best? What's
just another level of reptile? Like the intelligence is up here compared to, most reptiles are just very simple. They don't sort of have any bond with you whatsoever. He actually seeks you out, will come over, follow you around, sit on your lap, things like that, just to try and hang out with you a lot of the time. We also have a lot of other things as well. It's good in Australia, as you know, as most people know, we can only keep natives privately, but in the zoo industry, we can keep exotics. So we can get our exotic fix. So we do have things like reticulated pythons, Burmese pythons, blood pythons, Fijian crested iguanas, radiated tortoises, Indian star tortoises. There's a lot of different things.
Yeah.
That
is kind of nice
for us.
Yeah, you get your fix for the whole spectrum of all the animals. And so as far as for both of you guys, you have this, I want to get into your private keeping as well, because it seems like you do keep a lot on that side. But is there anything that either of you have drawn from the zoo world or learned from the zoo world that you apply to your private keeping? Like what have you learned working in that professional setting?
The zoo world pushed me a lot further towards the natural keeping side of things. Before I started working in the zoo, I was very much keep a huge collection I kept a lot of venomous for a lot of years. Like I'm talking 100+ venomous snakes.
Wow.
And a lot of it was just in rack systems. I did have a few enclosures, but they were just basic, the paper, plastic hides at each end. Then once we got into the zoo industry and you had to design actually a nice enclosure that the public could see, I really got into that side of things. I was like, this is amazing. And then I thought, what the hell am I doing at home? So I sort of started pushing the other way. And over the years, it's just progressed more and more and more till the point where I won't say I hate rack keeping, but it just does nothing for me whatsoever.
Yeah, there's no passion associated with it.
Oh, it's just stamp collecting more than anything else is how I see it these days.
Yeah. And what about yourself, Kristy? Is there anything that you've pulled from the zoo world into your private collection?
Yeah, I guess that's where I first started mock rocking as well. So back in the day when I first started as a brand new reptile keeper, redesigning some of the enclosures, working with some older keepers there who had been doing the mock rocking before, and sort of learnt the basics through them, and then have just, never stopped, just sort of kept honing the skills ever since then. And it's just become a huge passion now in creating these really naturalistic enclosures, something that just, is basically a slice of the natural habitat. And it's been a long progress. Okay, I look back at some of the enclosures, some of my first ones, and think, what were you doing? But I guess, we've all got to start somewhere. Is that noise really loud coming through?
I can hear it a little. Is it an animal?
He's trying to dig a hole through a plastic floor.
I can chuck him out if it's making. Is that too much background noise? I can.
If there's somewhere where he can go, it would be probably better just for the listeners.
Just throw him on the ground. Give me a second.
Yeah, no worries. Take your time. All right, this is the little troublemaker.
This is him.
Hey, Warren, welcome to the podcast, buddy. He's very cute.
He is very cute. He's an absolute terror, though. So,
how old is he?
Almost 10 months, actually. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's pretty big for 10 months.
Yeah, yeah. He's just on 6 kilos at the moment, so he's still got a lot of growing to do. Being a common wombat, he'll probably get up to about like 27 to 30 kilos as a male.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he'll be coming home with me for about another 5 months. He's already been coming home for close to 3. So it's a very, very long process with these guys before they're weaned. So
can you tell the story a little bit behind him? Is that was bred in the zoo and he needs to be bottle fed until he's weaned off?
He was bred in the zoo, and unfortunately Mum got a little bit sick and he started to lose weight and she was losing weight. So the vet made the decision to pull him for the best of both of them. And so at that point he came home with me and one of the other keepers, and we've been sort of sharing him because it's a very needy creature. Never hand raised something quite as demanding and as needy as this little dude.
Yeah, I bet. So how often does he need to be fed? Probably quite often.
At the moment, we're down to only 3 feeds a day. So it's pretty crazy, really, in terms of feeding. But he just needs lots of attention, lots of playtime. If he doesn't get his attention, as you can hear this morning, he's just trying to dig his way out until I go over and get him out and take him for a run, basically.
In the early days, did you have to wake up in the middle, or I guess like you were saying, he's nocturnal. So yeah, were you waking up in the middle of the night to feed him?
Yeah, so when we first pulled him, there was only about 1.5 kilos. So he was getting round the clock feeds at that point, like every 3 to 4 hours. So yeah, it was waking up all through the nights getting fed. But yeah, now he's pretty cruisy. We're down to those 3 feeds. So it's nice and easy at this point. No midnight feeds. It's just all through the day.
And what does he, are you keeping him in some sort of cage, like an enclosure, and then, or can he roam around the house?
Yeah, no, he's got to be in an enclosure. So he's just in like a 4-foot sort of enclosure at the moment, 4x2x2, something like that, out of mesh or wire. If you have him out of anything like with timber, he will chew his way through it. My whole house has been wombat proof. So I currently have boards of timber across all the bottom of my enclosures, because otherwise he'll be underneath them or chewing something. He's forever climbing onto shelves and pulling off water spray bottles. He came running out with a hide box just earlier. So he's always up to no good, basically. Everything's got to be off the ground, otherwise it's fair game for him.
And then once he's weaned, he goes back to the zoo?
Yeah. So he comes to work with me every day, getting used to all the smells and sounds and all the other keepers. He gets to play around there with everybody, which he loves. As you can see, he's
full of sleep.
Yeah, he's a complete attention little seeker. Hey. And yeah, he'll be one of our encounter animals later on down the track, so people will be able to come in and meet him and get photos with him and that sort of stuff.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I'm glad you popped him on because he's very cute and it's interesting. Yeah. I don't know anything about wombats, so that's amazing. So getting back to sort of what you guys have learned in the zoo, obviously the fake rock work, I can easily see that as part of the channel. So let's talk a little bit about your private collections. Matt, you were saying you're starting to shrink down, and I guess each of you have your own focuses with your own private collection. What do you... I guess, Matt, we'll start with you. What do you have? Do you have quite a large collection still? All
at the moment, considered? I've probably got about 40 odd animals, which is for me is a small collection. Mm-hmm. Smaller than I've had since I was in my teens, that's for sure. Like I said, I used to keep a massive collection of venomous snakes, and I'm one of those people that becomes very obsessed with what it is, and I just wanted to have different color forms of the same species. Like I'd have 10, 15 of the exact same species, but they were slightly different colors, and that was okay with me.
Right.
And then over time, I dwindled down a little bit and I started keeping a few things in natural enclosures. And then a few years back, Queensland, the governing body that does our licensing, decided that you couldn't keep any more than 20 venomous snakes privately. So they decided that 20 venomous snakes was okay, but 21 venomous snakes was too dangerous. Yeah.
What an arbitrary number.
I was sort of forced to downsize even more. And what I did is I got rid of most of my venomous collection and just sort of focused on a few other animals. I actually sold, I can't remember, but about 80 odd venomous snakes, and used the money and went and bought myself a pair of Owenpelly pythons, which are very few and far between everywhere. There's something I always wanted. They were just a dream species for me, and they weren't legal to keep here for a long, long time. And then they got made legal. A guy by the name of Gavin Bedford in the Northern Territory, actually started a breeding program for them, and I just had to have them from that point.
That's a species that's not only rare in captivity, but also very difficult to find in the wild, if I'm not mistaken.
Extremely difficult to find in the wild.
Are they rare or endangered, or?
No one really knows. They're in a really difficult area to access. They're found up in the east-west Arnhem Escarpment in the Northern Territory, and it's just humongous rock escarpments with sort of ravines through it with monsoon forest growing through the middle. So you can walk through it as much as you want, but the trees are 20, 30 meters high, and the rock escarpments are 100 meters high, and the snakes live up on the escarpments and in the tops of the trees. So they can be very, very difficult to find when you go there. It took me a lot of trips, a lot of years to actually see one in the wild.
Oh, so you have actually ended up finding one?
In the wild, yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And how much did a pair of those cost when you bought them?
Between $10,000 and $15,000 is what they usually go for.
Wow.
Yeah, I paid 10.
That is, that's expensive. So why were they?
Zookeeper.
Yeah. Why were they banned to keep in your area?
I think it was just because no one was keeping them in captivity. It was the point where they just weren't even a species that was one of those dream species that was just inaccessible most of the time. And then Gavin actually got the permits to get them, and he collected, I think it was 5 over many, many years. And those animals were then allowed to be put out into the private hobby. But certain states just said no with no justification of why they were saying no. And you still can't keep them in New South Wales and Victoria. They still haven't made them legal, but Queensland has. South Australia or Western Australia can't keep them either. So there's pretty much 3 states, Queensland, Northern Territory, and South Australia, that can legally keep them privately.
And then what are some of the venomous animals that you held on to? Do you still have, I think you do still have a few.
Yeah, I still have a few. I keep a few Barkley Tablelands death adders. I have a fairly large collection of Ingram's brown snakes, which I've probably got more Ingrams in captivity than everyone else in the country combined. And they were just a species that I became fascinated with because they are very, very touchy to keep. They can be very difficult, mostly because of their feeding. They only feed for a couple of months of the year most of the time, and often you'll buy a little Ingram's and it won't eat for 12 months after you get it, and that turned a lot of people off. And I just sort of, like I said before, I became obsessed, and I wanted to figure out why these things do what they do, why they don't eat all the time, why they can be so difficult, and why all of a sudden it'll get to a point in the year and your snake will go into the hide box and then you won't see it for 6 months. And it's been a process of just keeping a whole bunch of them. I was literally buying every single one that came up for sale.
Just to crack that code.
Yeah, just to crack that code. And I really wanted to breed them. That was the main thing. I wanted to be able to get them to a point where they can actually breed. And a few people have done it before in the past. But one of the big issues was because they don't eat so much, getting conditioned on the females was difficult.
Right.
And I finally got a couple of girls that became fairly reasonable feeders. And then last year I bred 2 different girls. And then one of the females actually double clutched. So she laid a clutch of eggs, and then 2 months later she laid another clutch of eggs again. So I've got a whole bunch of hatchlings at the moment as well.
So you must be doing something right then.
Yeah, I don't exactly know what that something right is just yet, but I've worked out now that a lot of their feeding seems to be based on seasons. Once it starts raining, they start feeding a lot of the time. Where they live in far western Queensland and the central Northern Territory, which is very, very harsh. It's just soil plains as far as the eye can see with massive cracks in the soil. Some of those cracks are 8, 9, 10 meters deep. Wow. And it's 50 degrees Celsius on the surface, but it might be low 20s down in the bottom. And they spend most of their life down in those soil cracks. And then they come out to bask in the sun in the cooler months, and they will usually feed where they found does get a wet season. So it'll start raining at certain times of year, and then they'll come out, they'll feed while the rain's happening, and then they'll disappear again for months and months and months. Yeah.
And And because we're definitely going to get into how you're replicating those sort of burrows and those cracks, because I think that's fascinating. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But just to finish off on that for now, they're quite toxic, right? How toxic are they?
They're a brown snake. So Pseudonia eastern browns are a Pseudonia, which are the second most venomous snake on the planet if you're a mouse. But all of them are highly toxic. I only know of one bite from an Ingram's, and it's actually our operations manager at work.
Oh.
Got bitten by one 25 years ago, and it did put him in hospital, and he needed anti-venom for it as well.
Does the anti-venom for the eastern brown work for that bite?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they use eastern brown anti-venom for all the brown snakes.
Oh, okay. Interesting. And then, Kristy, what about yourself? What are you keeping?
So Wombat's
he's biting my feet.
He's been feral, chewing power cords and doing everything he shouldn't when we're not looking at him. So I haven't got quite as large a collection. I think I've only got about a dozen or so animals, maybe a couple more than that at the moment. Nothing too huge. I've just gone back to focusing on a few species that I really enjoy. Probably the main ones of those are my brown tree snakes. So got a nice clutch out of those for the first time this year, which was pretty wicked. And my scrubbies. Okay, just scrubbies out in the wild. We see so many of them up here. I never thought it'd be something I'd really get into keeping. But the longer I've had these guys, the more in love I am with them. They are definitely hands down my favourite species to keep, which is nuts because all they do is bite and pee and crap all over you every time you try and handle them, especially the hatchos. But yeah, they're a pretty wicked species.
What is so attractive about them? Like, they are a beautiful species, but why are you so obsessed with them?
I don't see the attraction.
I don't know. My male sticks, he's getting close to that 4 meter mark now. They just seem to be a lot more intelligent than other snakes as well. So a lot more cluey. They watch what's going on. He picks up on routines and things like that. And they're just, I don't even know why the fascination, because they bite and pee and crap all over you pretty much all the time. But I guess it's something a little bit harder to work with. They took me a lot longer to crack in terms of breeding them as well. So it's been a learning experience with them, which has been pretty cool. But just definitely one of my favorites.
So let's talk a little bit about that style of care that you guys have. I think I know Matt for sure, and it sort of sounds like Kristy as well, kind of went through a phase of now dwindling the collection down and focusing on what you actually enjoy keeping and the species that you like, and then working hard to replicate those natural environments. And I mean, that's what I try to promote on the show as much as possible. I mean, I have a tiny collection compared to even Kristy. I only have 6 animals, and there was a point in time where I really wanted to expand and get as many as possible. But then you realize the joy that you get from actually replicating those environments and working with them and creating, habitats that are suitable for them is a lot more enriching for yourself as well as a keeper. So as far as you guys are concerned, what are some of the benefits you see of keeping in the natural way or keeping naturally as you guys do?
I think just getting to see that natural behaviour of the animals a lot more. So one of the things that we've both noticed a lot since keeping things in more naturalistic setups is the different behaviours and things you never would have expected. So even putting something like, say, pygmy pythons or Stimson's pythons in enclosures where they have the opportunity to bask under UV, and all of a sudden you're seeing a predominantly nocturnal species coming out during the day and actively looking for UV to bask under. That was a pretty cool one to witness. I didn't know if it would happen or not. And as soon as I provided it for these guys, they went from living in tubs and racks into a large enclosure with the UV provided. Instantly, they're back up there. Colours and patterns are a lot better. Their scales just look so much shinier and healthier. I've even seen some of my younger brown tree snakes digging burrows. They were given a deep substrate layer, and I never would have expected something like a brown tree snake to dig a burrow and actively get down into that dirt layer. So that's really cool just to watch these guys with, what would be natural behaviours, and all of a sudden we're giving them the opportunity to use those natural behaviours and to show us those.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the most rewarding thing, and I have a similar experience with my carpet python, my jungle carpet. It's the same sort of thing, nocturnal animal, but he basks every day, which is fun for me as a keeper to get to see him. And I know, Matt, you had made a post on Instagram, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, that the passion and the enjoyment you were starting to lose in the hobby when you were keeping, and I assume this is when you were sort of keeping and having a large collection and keeping fairly simply, and the post sort of alluded to the fact that you were dwindling the collection but also focusing on replicating these habitats and then finding more passion there. So can you talk a little bit about that? I know you kind of mentioned it already, but you can go into a little more detail.
The real big one for me, like the real changer, was I do a lot of herping. Like herping's my main passion, more so than keeping. And what I was doing is I was going out seeing these animals in these awesome environments. Don't chew on my phone. Doing these awesome environments, and I'd come home and then see the same species in a plastic tub sitting on just like aspen bedding or wood chips or something like that. And I just thought, I actually felt like a shit person for doing things like that. And over time, I just, like, it's a slow process to move everything from one enclosure to move them out of a rack system into an enclosure. But I was slowly just building up natural enclosures and just watching that animal do what it's meant to do. Like even species that don't climb, or you don't see climb and aren't meant to climb, as soon as you give them that climbing opportunity, they will take it every single time. And the muscle tone difference that I was seeing in my animals was incredible. Just, you'd pick up a snake out of a rack and it would just be this flabby, horrible mess, and put it in an enclosure, and all of a sudden the muscle tone would build right up, and put them under UV light and their colors would intensify. And they, like Kristy said, they would actively seek out that UV light. Like a lot of nocturnal species, like even like my Olympellis and even my green pythons, they will go and sit under the UV light at certain points during the day. And even like, they might not obviously do it, but they'll cryptically bask. They'll hang a coil out from underneath the foliage, underneath where the UV light is, or they'll stick their head out of, like my Olympelli enclosure's got big, deep crevices in it, and the snake will actually stick its head out and put it up underneath the light, and it'll do that for a couple of hours, which obviously shows that the snake is getting something useful from that light. And the more I watched my animals doing that, the more I thought, I just have to do it with everything. I have to get everything into a natural enclosure where they can actually display these natural behaviors and act like a reptile.
So if you said you have about 40 animals, I guess that's the end. Is your goal at the end of the day to have less than that, or is your goal to have 40 in those display enclosures? Because that's going to take up like
ideally,
half
yes.
your house.
I would like to have less, but I'm struggling now to get less than what I am. All the animals I've got, I really, really like, and they're not something I really want to get rid of. And I'm very attached to a lot of them. I have moved a few animals outside as well into like aviaries and that type of thing, which is working fairly well. The only thing I don't enjoy about it is some species like monitors just revert back to wild and you never see them. They just hop the whole time. But it's making more room in the house for me to be able to build bigger enclosures. The other issue I've got is I keep some large snakes like Olympellis and olive pythons, and they need enormous enclosures to be able to set them up properly.
So right now your Olympellis, are those still relatively small, or are they in a
3 years old? They're 3 years old at the moment, and my male is the biggest, and he's just under 3 meters now.
Oh, okay. So they are pretty big.
But slender. Like they're that thick.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Like
they're
an
just
inch or two.
Snakes. Yeah. They're not like an olive python that's built like this, at the same size. Yeah.
So I think one of the standout things in both of your enclosures is the fake rock work, because it's just, it's some of the best at-home rock work I've seen ever. It's amazing. And I think there's so many features about it that's so cool. So have you guys both learned to do that at the zoo? Or, because when I watch the videos, it's mostly Kristy doing it, but then I've seen Matt, you post some things. So is it mostly, did Kristy teach you? Or
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I said, I started picking it up from working at the park originally, learning it from some of the older keepers there. And then Matt joined the team a few years later, and he showed an interest in it. Usually no one else showed much of an interest in trying to do it, because it's not easy, especially starting off, and it is a hugely time-consuming process. So, yeah, he showed a bit of interest, and so took that lead and started sort of showing him how to do it. And then, he's taken it on and builds enclosures, as good as anyone. So it's pretty cool to see it come full circle there.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And I want to talk about the process in a second, but one of the things that jumps out right away is just how you guys design it, as far as you were saying with the Ompelli pythons having those deep shelves. And I saw that, and Kristy, you had done that with sort of the caves and with the brown tree snake, and just using the rocks in ways that I've not seen people do. And I think that just adds so much more vertical space and usable space in an enclosure when you have deep shelves and these sort of areas where the animals can actually hide up the wall rather than just making a wall look like fake rock. It's incredibly useful rock, which I think is
and I guess
amazing.
that's just looking at where they come from. So that's where most of this come from. Like I said, I've been doing it for like 10 years now. And originally those first few backgrounds were very much stock standard, very, sort of flat, no real depth to them. And the more you look at them, you realize that you need depth and different styles to actually make it look like a real rock instead of just a flat piece of, concrete on a wall, basically. So to try and get that depth to it. And then looking at where the animals come from themselves and actually just trying to replicate that. And, okay, so how do they hide? Where do they hide? What area or what sort of, micro environment within that huge area that they live in do they actually occupy, and how do we recreate that? And I guess that's the biggest thing, thinking about where they come from, what sort of micro habitat you need to create.
And I guess that's where herping really comes in handy, because you have those pictures and that visual in your mind of exactly the rock that you're trying to create. Yeah,
the big one for me is I wanted to create exactly what I was seeing out in the wild. And I take stupid amounts of pictures of just rocks and plants and all sorts of stuff when we're out herping. And I just look at it and go, I just want to replicate that, but inside an enclosure. I see, and I'm not trying to badmouth other people's enclosures, but I see a lot of enclosures where it is just a plain rock wall that just looks like a slab of concrete chucked in there.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even look like where that animal's found in the wild. Like someone might be keeping a carpet python or like a jungle carpet with this red rock wall behind it. And it doesn't exist where they're found. And that's all well and good that someone does that, but it's not for me. I want it to look like I've got a piece of nature sitting in my house.
Those backgrounds still provide for the animals and definitely gives it more enrichment than just, a bare enclosure for sure. But for us, it really is about recreating that actual slice of the natural habitat.
Yeah, and it pays off because it looks so amazing. So maybe, Kristy, you could walk through just sort of the steps that you take to create this. And I mean, obviously you have videos on YouTube that go into really good detail. So maybe you could just kind of walk through the basics.
Yeah. So first off, for me, for any enclosure, I will literally spend weeks looking at an empty box and planning it kind of in my head, what I want. Heaps of resource material as well. So I go through and troll through the internet, whatever photos I've taken, whatever photos Matt's taken, and try and get a huge amount together of the habitat that I'm looking to recreate. And then I think about which is going to be the best method, because there are quite a few different methods that I use to create the backgrounds. So work out which one's going to be the best for that particular enclosure. And then from there, it's just a matter of starting to get that polystyrene in and getting your different layers of grout in from there, and then painting it at the end to bring it all together.
So yeah, as far as the carving goes, what tools are you using to carve it out in a way that makes it look so natural?
So recently we've been using like hot knives or hot wire cutters. So before that we were just using, Stanley knives or kitchen knives or anything like that, but that makes a huge mess when you're working with polystyrene. Found these hot wire cutters and the hot knife, and that really has changed the game. It does let you get a lot more detail. In saying that, I don't actually carve a great deal of the detail into the foam itself. So I usually use most of that when I'm doing the grout at the end. So I'll do maybe 2 layers of grout first to get my shape. And then my third and final layer will usually be a fair bit thicker, either grout or concrete, depending on what I'm using and what species are going to be going into the enclosure. And that tends to be where I carve most of the detail, is actually into that last layer. And for carving into the concrete, I'm just using like either a piece of wire or like a timber skewer like you'd use for making a kebab or something like that, and use that to carve my detail.
And then the grout is just like regular flooring grout that you get at the hardware store?
Yep. So again, it just depends on species, whether we use just standard grout like you'd use in tiling from the hardware shop, or whether we actually use a concrete mix. So obviously if we're putting large monitors or something that's going to be quite heavy wear that we need to scrub quite a lot, then we'll probably go the concrete, just because it's a little bit harder
And then as far as painting goes, because that's really where it comes, people can do a great job carving things out, and then they go to paint a rock and they just paint it gray and it's like looks terrible. But when I watch you guys, your work, it's like, wow, I can't believe how much details in them. So A, what are some tips for painting it properly to make it look natural? And then B, what type of paint are you using?
So in terms of the type of paint, it's just standard acrylic, nothing fancy. You can pick it up from any of your hardware stores, your craft shops. They all have just straight acrylic paints.
Okay.
Comes in a variety of colors, so that makes it a little bit easier as well to, change it up. Painting is probably actually my favorite part of it, because it is really when you bring the whole thing to life. Up until then, it just looks like blobs of concrete almost. So it's getting that paint in that really creates that natural look to it. And I guess with painting, little is probably more. So you don't want to go anything too heavy. You want to go small amounts, and you can always layer small amounts. So I often start with a black wash to age the rocks first. So that's just straight black acrylic paint mixed with some water, either spray it on in a pump spray bottle or paint it on with paintbrush, and then hit extra sections with a little bit extra water to sort of blend it out a bit, so you get heavier in some areas, lighter in others. That's usually where I start to give it an aged look. And then I just use a dry brush method. Mm-hmm. So that's just a matter of a tiny, tiny amount of paint mixing to get your right color, very small amount on the brush, dab it off on something else until it's pretty much gone. And then you start painting with that. So you're only putting really, really tiny amounts on. I often see people go way too heavy handed. Mm-hmm. And then it does look like you've just got a great big blob of paint basically, and not a rock, because there's so many different colors when you start looking at rocks. Coming through.
Yeah, so you just really let the shape of the rock do the work for you. When you use the dry brush method, you're just kind of painting it on, and it's just allowing it to highlight the raised areas and whatnot. Yeah. And then the last question I have, or I guess two last questions, is after the paint is on, is there anything that seals the background, or is it just once the paint's good, you're done?
For most of ours, once the paint is good and dried, you're done. So for most of the dry enclosures that we're using, I don't bother to seal it. Most of the sealers end up giving it a really shiny, wet look, which works for some things if you're going for sort of something with water in it. But for an arid species like, say, that bearded dragon enclosure I did, nothing about that wants to be shiny or wet. So I don't use a sealer on those. Most of the enclosures that I've built at the park over the last 10 years haven't had sealers on them. And they hold up really well. Maybe after sort of 4 or 5 years, you might need to touch your paintwork up to sort of brighten it again. But otherwise, I haven't had any issues with, cleaning or getting urates or anything off like that. It's literally just spray bottle and scrub it off.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's amazing. And then, Matt, you had done something, I think, is it the Owen Pelly Python enclosure that you have a water feature as well with it sort of dripping down?
No, that was in a rough-scale Python enclosure.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about that? What's that?
It didn't work.
Oh, it didn't work.
No, so water features and my building haven't gone well together.
Well, water features are a real pain. For anybody that's done these, you think it's going to be a great idea, and then you're just...
With that enclosure, I put so much work into making sure it was all waterproof and painted so much pond sealer on it and used like proper plastic pond liner and had the waterfall running, and I was stoked. I thought it was so good, and it ran for a week.
Can you describe a little bit what the end product looked like? Because it did look amazing.
Yeah, so it was like rock shells coming down, and what I'd done is I had like a pool. It looked like rocks. The water was collecting in a pool of rocks, and then stop it.
WOMBAT attack.
Yeah, he's just constantly biting me. And I had a pump in the pond, and then it would go up and it would just trickle out of like a crevice in the rocks and just slowly run back down into the water. And the aim was to just make a crevice. Like in the Kimberley, there's a lot of just water seeping out of the rocks, and it just runs down to these little pools. And that's what I wanted to create for a rough scale python. And it ran for a week, perfect. And then all of a sudden it started leaking.
I did warn him.
She warned me. She's like, don't do it. Don't even try. It doesn't work. I've done it
a dozen times. It doesn't work.
It never works.
I was persistent. I was convinced that I'd used enough pond sealing products that it would work, but somehow the water still found a way out of this pond. It was only a slow leak. Like it was dropping a mil a day, but it was enough that it was going through the bottom of the enclosure and getting into the timber, and I just gave up. Just trip. Just literally turned it off and filled the pond at the bottom with dirt and planted some plants in it.
There's nothing worse than that when you're like doing a water test and you're like, okay, I've given it 12 hours, and you go take the flashlight or something to look behind and you see like a little bit of shine. Oh, it's brutal.
And then after a week, there was literally a patch 10 centimeters across, just in the timber on the bottom, of just wet. Great. It's coming through now.
Well, it did look great when it was running.
Great for a while. It looked good for a photo and a video, and then it just fell to pieces after that. It's still got a snake and everything in it. It just doesn't have a water feature anymore.
Yeah. Well, it was a great idea. Maybe one day you'll try it again.
That was one that I did paint with pond sealer, and I hated how the rocks looked afterwards because they were just too shiny. And I tried to sand it back to try and make it look more natural, and to me it just looks like unnatural rock. Yeah, I'm not. Especially
now, if there's no water dripping, it's just sort of shiny rocks.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, one thing that you do, and I think this is probably just the benefit of having, but the both of you having access to interesting Australian forest, is the wood features that you both have in the enclosures, especially in the green tree python enclosure, Matt. You have, it's just like these really cool pieces of wood that have vines growing around it. Like, it just looks so natural. Is that just from going outside and chopping?
Yeah, so we're lucky. Living in North Queensland, we are surrounded by rainforest. Like Cairns is literally just rainforest all the way around the outside. I have rainforest trees growing in my yard.
Wow.
So I can go out and just take bits and pieces as I need them. And where we work as well as surrounded by patches of rainforest. So you can sort of get everything that you require. But also when we are out on herping trips, got this obsession with just collecting cool things that we see, like see a nice piece of timber on the side of the road. It's like, oh, I'll take that. I could use it. Or some red rocks, or just something that looks like the natural habitat of the animal, red sand.
We literally have like one drawer in the back of the troopy that's dedicated to substrate for every trip that we go out on. So it always comes back. We have like, that's the equal to our food and spare parts. That's in one drawer, and the other drawer is always empty for for substrate.
We did a trip. We did a trip one weekend just so I could collect black soil from my Ingram's enclosures, and it was 6,000 kilometer round trip that we did over 3 days, just so I could collect a heap of black soil to put in my Ingram's enclosures.
See, for a non-reptile person, that doesn't make any sense. But for me, I'm like, I get it. Like, I would do that. It makes sense.
People say that's ridiculous that you went that far just to get some dirt.
But what happens when you have to clean it? Do you clean the soil so you can continue to use it? Like, you're not going to make another 1,000-kilometer trip to refill yourself.
Bring back more than I need. And then I just clean the soil and spot clean what I need to. The enclosures, it's partially bioactive. It's hard to keep it moist enough in there that a good cleanup crew can establish. And because my cracks in my soil aren't 8 meters deep, it doesn't stay as damp as what I'd like it to. But I still do have springtails and isopods and that type of thing in there. And they help a little bit, but not enough, especially for a fairly larger lapid that produces a lot of waste.
Well, I think that benefit of being in the environment where some of these animals are from is just such a huge, like, that's one thing, I keep boas, South American species, but then I go outside and get wood and leaf litter from outside. I'm like, it just doesn't look right. It's like, I have oak leaves from northern Canada or from, Canada with trees that just, it's not the same. And so when I see your guys' enclosures with all these pieces that just look like they fit properly, it looks amazing.
Very, very lucky to live in a country that has so many different environments within sort of close proximity to each other. This is a big country, but like we only have to go an hour west and we're in complete like savanna, dry country away from the rainforest, and then another hour out and you start to get red soil and that type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that is so cool.
We're lucky. Yeah.
So Kristy, can you tell us a little bit about the cave enclosure that you did? Because I think that was another just fascinating idea that I've not seen anybody really do, and I think it seems like it worked out well. Not quite like the water feature that Matt did. This one seemed like it worked.
Yeah, it definitely has worked out really well. So again, it's just I'm always trying to do something different. Matt will attest to that I never take the easy path to do anything, and all of my enclosures are usually incredibly intricate, and there's a lot of extra detail, and I usually try and think of the hardest thing I can possibly build and think, yep, that's exactly what I want to do. And the cave one was a little bit like that. It was just something totally different. So I was trying to think of a way that I could build a brown tree snake habitat that was a little bit unique. So these guys are found all over the place, but we'd recently done a Kimberley trip before I started build on this one. And we found this really awesome cave where when we climbed into it, it was just full of brown tree snake eggs that had hatched out. We also found a few brown trees cruising around in there at night. So I decided, that's what I had to recreate. So it was something a little bit different. It, I think, displays the snakes really well. It's nice and dark apart from the light area at the back, which is where we've got some plants growing, which replicates like a small hole in the top of the cave where that sunlight would come through. And again, with that enclosure, we've seen heaps of natural behaviour in there. So that's the one where I've seen the tree snakes actually digging burrows down into the ground as well, which is really unique. And depending on the time of year or the time of month, even whether they're feeding, whether they're in shed, what they're doing, you get to see all those natural behaviours.
Yeah, it did turn out so amazing, and it's just something so unique. And so I'll encourage everybody to go check out that video because it literally looks like there's a beam of sun shining into a cave, and so you did a great job on it. And I think there's so much more that we can do, and those are those ideas that as soon as somebody does it, it introduces it to herpetoculture, and then other people will start playing with it as well. And just it's very cool.
It's all about trying new things. I think that's a lot of people that say, "Oh, I could never create something like that." Like we get a lot of comments like that on the YouTube post. I could never build that. That's amazing, but I could never do it. And it's literally just starting. That's all you have to do is just start these things. If you don't like it, you just concrete over it. It's if you don't like your paint job, paint it again. All it is at the end of the day is a coat of grout and another layer of paint, and you can have something completely different.
I think a good thing that did come from the zoo industry as well is that process of trying something new all the time, because you're always trying to make your display enclosures bigger and better. And obviously people will come in and see something and you want them to, next time they come in, to be able to see something better every single time. So it was always about making that enclosure more like replicating their natural environment, but interesting to look at the same time. And then I just wanted to do that at home. And Kristy was the same. I just wanted to walk into my house and look at something that was zoo quality and replicated nature and was just different to what other people were doing.
Well, I think it's such a good point too, and just practice. That's the biggest thing is practice doing these things.
I sucked at it. I was hopeless to start with. Everything I built, like I've built enclosures. I've still got a couple. I look at them and go, "That's awful." I'd never put photos of them up or anything. It was just my first tries at mock rocking, and they just look like someone had just put some shelves in an enclosure and covered them in grout. But
that's where you start
to begin with.
It
didn't look like rock at all.
Practice and just starting. That's the main thing I tell people, is just have a go.
Yeah, exactly. So Matt, we'll turn it back to the brown snake enclosure and the substrate, because I think that is something, I'm not sure if that was I don't think I've seen it necessarily on the YouTube channel. Maybe it was, but definitely on your, it was on your Instagram.
Actually. So
can you tell us about that process? Because you had talked about trying to replicate those seasonal cycles and how the soil is actually, and the substrate actually plays a big role in replicating the seasonal cycles. And then also like how you've done those burrows and everything and the cracks is really fascinating. So I'll just let you take it away.
So what I've got in the enclosures what I've got in the enclosures is just soil. It's not very deep. It's probably 15 centimeters at the most, but it's a type of soil. It's just known as black soil, and it's like a clay-based soil that gets really wet, and when it dries out, it expands and contracts. Sorry, it doesn't expand, contracts, and gets these big cracks in them that open fairly wide, and that's what their natural habitat looks like. And obviously they live down in those soil cracks because it's cooler. So what I did with my enclosure is I just filled it as high as I possibly could with that dirt, with the black soil, poured buckets of water in there, and then put heat lights like every 20 centimeters or so along it, and left it for about 3 months and just let it crack on its own. And it did it way better than I thought it was ever going to. These big cracks. What I'd also done as well is underneath the wet soil, I'd buried hide boxes under there and just stuck a pipe to the entrance of the hide box so I could find it down the track. And it cracked, and where I'd stuck the pipe, it actually cracked perfectly through the pipes. So I just took the pipe out and the crack went straight into a hide box underneath the soil. And the snakes were using the cracks to go down into these hide boxes. And in one of the enclosures, I've actually got a piece of pipe connecting 2 hide boxes. So they can go down one pipe at one end of the enclosure, go under the surface the whole way to the other end, and then come out another crack. Wow. So they don't even have to expose themselves a lot of the time.
So are the hides just sort of like the classic plastic snake
like
hides?
planter, like the bottoms of pot plants.
Gotcha.
That's all it is, just turned upside down with a hole cut in it so they can actually get into them. And I've noticed, I did dig up one of the enclosures about 12 months ago, and they do crap in the bottom of the hide, which is something I was concerned about. The cleanup crew gets to it a bit, but it's probably not the cleanest thing in the world. One of them also had about 5 shed skins in it as well. They'd all been picked to pieces by the cleanup crew, but they still were there.
Well, in the wild, their den will be full of feces and sheds anyway. It's one of those things where...
Yeah, I see in the wild they can get away from it. In captivity, it's a little bit harder.
Right.
But to me, it sort of just... I was getting better activity out of the snakes. I was getting way better feeding. So it sort of, to me, it was worth it at the same time, even if the snake was living in a bit of waste every now and then, which probably sits horribly with a lot of people. But
and like you said, they don't eat a lot, right? So that it's not like they're producing. It's not like a colubrid that's just like painting the walls every 5 days.
No, they definitely don't do that. And as far as elapids go, like elapids are similar to a colubrids where they will produce a fair bit of waste, but these don't produce a huge amount of waste. And it's most of the time it's on the surface, but usually, occasionally they will go down the hole at some point.
So do you, in your mind, have you worked out any solutions for that? Like, is it possible to have it so you don't have to dig it up? There's just no way
to figure it out. I've tried to make it as well so I can actually lift the hide and the soil all out in one piece. So it's sort of a cutout of the soil.
Yeah.
And I can lift that out. Doesn't work.
It just crumbles.
Because I spray down the enclosures so heavily at certain times of year, like I almost replicate that flooding condition coming into our summer. And that just makes the soil then contract again, and it all just joins back together, and you end up with different cracks in different places a lot of the time. So it didn't really work at the same time. But that spraying down that I did is really what got the snakes feeding. As soon as those first rains would come through, the snakes would all of a sudden become active. They'd come up out of the holes and they'd feed for me straight away.
And those would be snakes that, if they hadn't had that, you'd have tried to feed them and they would have had no interest.
Yeah. Well, everything I'd tried before didn't really work. The only thing that would set them off is it would get to like the heat of summer here, which is very hot. And all of a sudden they would start eating, but they'd only eat I had one female that would only eat for December each year, which is the start of our summer. And then she would eat again for 11 months.
Wow, that's insane.
It was driving me nuts. And she was 8 years old and still the size of like any other brown snake at a year old.
Well, yeah, just the amazing how efficient they can be with those a couple meals a year.
Yes.
So then when you had those heat lamps on the soil, how... You said it took 3 months. Were they on full time, or did you have like a timer?
24/7, but there was no animals in there.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
It was getting hot. Like I'd temperature gun the surface of the soil, and it'd be 90 degrees Celsius.
Wow! Oh my God!
At points, I was like, I'm going to start a fire.
Yeah,
but it worked. It's what got them to crack really, really well.
And so then to continue to replicate that, I mean, you say you spray it down and it will re-crack itself, but if you want to set up a new enclosure, you kind of have to go back through that 3-month process.
I go through the whole process. It's a long wait. It takes months for it to crack properly. It will start cracking within a couple of weeks, but if you want the really nice looking deep soil cracks that are nice and wide, it takes months for it to actually happen. It's a slow process to set up.
Yeah, but it's worth it in the end. And so
I really like how they look.
Yeah, it does look really cool, and obviously the snakes are using it.
Now that we're heading into winter, I won't see those snakes for the next 3 or 4 months at all. They won't come out. They don't even come out to bask in the winter months. They'll just sit buried in a hide, not moving. Yeah,
well, I mean, that's what they would do. That's what they're doing outside, right?
And a lot of people have said to me, it's like, oh, but you don't get to see the animals. And sometimes I think to myself, oh, I haven't seen such and such snake for weeks, but it's what they naturally do.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
get to behave like a snake is meant to behave. It's probably stressful for them to be constantly getting pulled out all the time and seen.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. And so thinking about, you're saying you're measuring the temperature in there when you're trying to dry out the soil, and it made me think, when you guys go out into the field to go herping or just to take pictures and whatnot, do you ever take like a gun to like a surface temperature gun or a humidifier or hydrometer, I should say, or thermometer to take any of those stats?
I haven't really done it before. I've got a friend that is obsessed with it, and he will take a temperature gun absolutely everywhere. So I've sort of just gone off his readings a lot of the time. He loves sticking a temperature gun on a road where he's seen a lace monitor basking or a log where something was basking, just to get an idea. And it does give you a really good idea of just how high the temperatures are that these animals can handle.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? You can't. It's sun beating on a surface. It can.
Yeah, we saw a lace monitor one day laying on its belly with its arms outstretched on a road in the middle of the day in summer in Western Queensland. And when we temperature gunned that road, it was 85 degrees Celsius.
Oh my gosh, that is insane.
It was loving it.
Like we're pretty close to boiling water at that point.
Yeah, and this monitor just got its belly flat on the road.
Yeah, that's amazing. That is. I mean, I forget who I was talking to. Somebody on the podcast. We're talking about that, about how how monitors, especially, we probably don't realize how hot they get in the wild. They're gonna have lots of points where they're gonna drop the temperatures, but it's probably not that relatively cool warm spot that we give them in the wild. They're gonna have these incredibly hot spots. Yeah,
some of the places you see monitors, especially in the Kimberley, like all those rocks that they're living on, like Kimberley rock monitors and black palm rock monitors, those rocks are all 50, 60, 70 degrees Celsius during the day, and they're just walking around on it like it's nothing at all. And you're struggling to walk across it with shoes on because your shoes are melting.
Yeah. Man, that's so crazy. And so then you have Kimberley rock monitors, I think. So do you try to replicate temperatures like that, or is that just way too dangerous? That's just so hot.
I don't try and replicate like everything being that temperature. I do have a hot rock at one end, and what I've actually done in my Kimberley rock monitor enclosure is I've built a piece of slate about that thick into the basking surface, so it heats up even more than what the grout does. And even when the lights go out, it radiates heat for hours and hours afterwards, and they'll lay on it even after dark. Sometimes they'll come and lay on it. One of the things about living in North Queensland is our biggest issue is keeping things cool, not keeping things warm.
Right.
A lot of the time, in summer, my Kimberley rock monitor enclosure, my whole house will be in the low 30s.
Oh my God.
Celsius. And I can't bring the temperatures back down without turning air conditioning on a lot of the time. So even during the summer months, my enclosure will be probably as hot as what it is in the Kimberley a lot of the time. And it's why I sort of only keep reptiles now from Northern Australia, because I was keeping southern species and they just didn't do well in our summers.
Interesting.
It was just too hot. Even our winters don't get cold. Like we're a week off winter right now, and today's a cooler day, and it's still probably in the high 20s.
So, as perspective, we're going into summer, and tonight's supposed to go down to like 4 degrees for some reason. I'm not sure why it's so cold. It doesn't get
that cold here ever. Even in the middle of winter, in the middle of the night, it will not get to that cold.
It won't even go down to 5?
No, a really cold night for us in winter is 10 degrees?
Yeah. Maybe if you're lucky.
And that's freezing for here.
And you might get one night a year like that.
And all the locals act like they're going to get hypothermia.
Yeah, you guys should come here, feel what that's like.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to handle it.
No.
So let's talk a little bit about the YouTube channel. How did you guys decide to come up with that? Why did you decide to do it? And then, is this Kristy's brain behind it? Go ahead, Kristy.
Yeah. I guess the main thing was I was putting up photos of my enclosures, and people kept asking me for, how did I do it? Can I explain it in more detail? Is there any others that I can look at? All that sort of stuff. So I finally sort of decided just to bite the bullet and start making YouTube videos, which is completely left field for me. I have never had really much interest in filming or taking photos or video or any of that sort of stuff. It's completely new for me. So it was just a learning curve, and decided to chuck it all up. And that first video that I did for that bearded dragon enclosure just went off and got, huge amounts of attention and huge amounts of views. And I realized that maybe it was something that people weren't seeing all that often. And they seem to like going into the real detail about how to do these enclosures and that real step-by-step sort of nature to it. And it's just sort of grown since then.
Yeah, I think it is rare to start a YouTube channel and then have the first video that you put up do so well. Like, I don't know what it's at for views now, but it's,
like I was expecting maybe a couple of hundred views on it. I really didn't expect it to take off. And even, I mean, the entire channel's only been up and running for just over 6 months now, I think 7 months, something like that. And, you know, we've already cracked that 1,000 subscribers. And yeah, I mean, I thought that would take years. I really didn't think it would take off anywhere near as quickly as it has.
Yeah, and you've hit 1,000 subscribers with only like 6 or 7 videos. It's not like you're posting videos every week.
It was that many. I think it was like 5 or 6 videos, and we hit the 1,000, which is just absolutely insane. And the channel just kept growing without me even putting anything up. So it kind of gave me a little bit of incentive to try and make a few more videos.
Yeah, well, and I think it's because it is different. Like you guys are adding a skill set that isn't. People aren't under, you know, you see fake rock like that and those type of naturalistic enclosures, and people just want to know how to do it. So I think that's probably why it's starting to kind of blow up. Is there any future plans? What are your future plans with the channel? What are some projects that you guys have ideas for?
I always have way too many projects in the pipeline. There's too many half-completed projects around this house. So currently we just put out the first part of my Cape York biotype build for the fish tank. So that's doing a background using just expanded foam and a substrate on it. So it's not the concrete background that I've done in the other enclosures. I have used that style of background in a few other tanks around the house. So I thought it was about time that I actually showcased how to do that one. So part 1 of that just went up the other week. Hopefully I'll get part 2 up fairly shortly, which is where we'll stock it and do the hardscape. We've just got a couple of hatchling Hammersliensis, so the Southern Pilbara rock monitors. So the next project will be building an enclosure for those guys. I'm going to do something a little bit different, where instead of actually creating all of the rocks out of one piece of foam in the enclosure, I'll actually be making a few of the rocks outside and then stacking them in to try and get a bit more of a natural look that way. So it'll be something cool coming up. And then we'll probably, we're actually heading up to Cape York in about 2 weeks' time. So we're going on a herping trip for a couple of weeks up in the Cape. So there'll no doubt be.
So the aim is to try and film that.
For that. Yeah, maybe go and try and find green pythons and a few other of those species that you get up around the Cape. So there'll be a video coming out on that shortly as well.
That sounds amazing. And then will you guys ever do like a tour of your enclosures that you have? Is that something that you have planned?
Yeah, definitely. I still have plans to try and film all the enclosures that we currently have and showcase those to people as well. I guess it's just a time thing between work and hand raising feral animals and all the other things that happen in life. You just get tied up. But the plan definitely will be to try and showcase everything. We've both just badly gotten an obsession with fish tanks at the moment. So
that's a dangerous one too.
That is very dangerous.
We stayed away from that for quite a while, but I started off with one fish tank and now both of us have quite a few of them. So we'll have to get around to showcasing those at some point as well.
Yeah, and there's definitely an overlap.
A lot of it's been on Kristy because I haven't done any of the YouTube stuff really because I hate being on camera.
You get used to it. I used to hate it too.
I've just been slack.
Yeah. But you have, that's why, because when you go to your Instagram, you see all these enclosures that we're like, I wish those were on YouTube so we can see how you did it. So we go.
They will be eventually. I'll eventually get it done.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
Yeah, we need to start putting out videos a bit more often.
It is hard though. It is time consuming. Like, doing a project while filming makes it take twice as long. And I don't think
I will start filming. I'll start building an enclosure and I'll start filming it and I'll get partway through and go, I hate filming this, and then I just won't film the rest of it, and then all the first lot of footage is just wasted. It's all for nothing.
Yeah, because you just want to go. You just want to keep building. You'll just set the tripod up.
Yeah, just want to set the camera up and remember to change angles and put it here and show this part. And half the time you get home from work and you just start on it without even thinking about the filming side of things. So still trying to get our head around that a little bit.
Exactly. And but you did do some, Matt, you've done some filming with when you went herping, and I'm sure that's what you guys have planned to do as well. So maybe we'll just kind of wrap up talking about herping and some of the trips that you guys have gone on. So are there any highlights at the top of your head that either of you can remember? I'm sure there's many.
There's so many.
The roughies in the Kimberley.
Yeah, rough scale pythons in the Kimberley was a big highlight. Yeah. That was a huge highlight for me because that was my last Australian python to see in the wild. And the Kimberley's not an easy place to get to, especially where rough pythons are found. And when we got there, it was cold, even for the Kimberley, and I was panicking that we weren't going to see anything. But we saw 2 while we were up there. That was a huge highlight for me.
A lot of man hours went into that.
Yeah, so let's build up to that moment a little bit. How many, was there some failed expeditions before that of trying to see them?
That was our first trip into
wow.
actual rough-scale python range. And the drive-in is, long. I don't even know how to describe it. It's a horrible road. It's long, and it's so bad that you're in first gear most of the way.
Oh, my God.
And what was it? Into Prince Regent? 150 something Ks of just this horrendous goat track through the bush, and you're just following GPS coordinates to find where you've got to get to. And then we got there. There's a big rock escarpment. It looked good. I walked it all night, the first night, and didn't see a single form of life.
I think I gave up by like 1 o'clock.
Kristy had gone to bed, and I just kept going, and I came back depressed. There was nothing. It got down to 8 degrees that night, and I was like, oh, we're never going to see snakes when it's this cold. And then the second night, we did the same thing, went back out looking, and we
changed sides.
We walked to a different side of the escarpment, and it was cold. It was 13 degrees when we found the snake. It was a little juvenile rough-scale python sitting out in ambush, like, looking for food. And it's one of the most exciting things I've ever seen.
Did you snap photos of it?
Yeah, I've got photos of it. They're on my Instagram.
Okay. Yeah, that would be amazing. I bet that feeling of seeing it, just excitement.
Yeah. The other big one for me was seeing an Oenpelli in the wild. That took 6 trips for me.
Wow.
Of just walking around the escarpment in like the West Arnhem Land, it's really hard going, and it's really hot a lot of the time and wet all the time. And I actually had pretty much given up for the night, and I sat down to have a rest and just was sitting there and was scanning the trees with my torch, and there was one sitting up in the tree.
Oh, that's amazing.
So I found it. Yeah.
Thorny devils.
I think I actually screamed when I found that.
See, that's the benefit of reptiles or snakes. You're not really going to scare it away if you scream.
No, exactly. Thorny devil was another big one. Yeah.
That took you a few trips.
That took me a long time. Like, they're a relatively common lizard.
I got it the first time I was there, but took me
your luck charm.
It took me a lot of trips to Central Australia to see a thorny devil. I'd seen dozens of roadkill ones before I actually saw a live one. And each time you see a dead one on the road, it hurts that little bit more.
Yeah.
And then eventually we found one. And it was very exciting as well.
Oh, that's amazing. And have you've done some herping outside of Australia as well, right?
Yeah, I've done Malaysia, Vietnam, and Thailand.
Okay.
And Thailand was my favorite by far. And the highlight over there was we actually found a king cobra eating a reticulated python. Oh,
I think I've seen that. I think that was on your Instagram, right?
Yeah. That was amazing to see. That's really awesome. Like, the king cobra was a holy grail for me, and to see it actually eating a retic was incredible.
That's insane. Yeah, and it's just so important if you have the access and have the opportunity to go out and do that, because you just learn so much.
The best. Yeah. I love it so much. Every year we'll try and do at least one decent herping trip where we go somewhere in the country. I'm lucky. I've seen pretty much all of Australia now. Been nearly everywhere just chasing reptiles.
Yeah. Do you sell, because you take a lot of really nice photos, are those photos for sale anywhere, or you just...
I haven't sold them before, but I have used them in books. Like, people have asked me to use them in books and that sort of thing. I've never really had any interest in selling them. I just like to take photos for myself as a memory, and if I can get it in a book, that's cool to me. Yeah,
because there's some really amazing, you're a great photographer.
Thank you.
Yeah, they look great.
I don't take photos as much as what I used to. I used to be really about taking photos of everything I saw. Now, photography with wildlife is frustrating more than anything, especially reptiles, especially snakes.
I bet, yeah.
I don't like to cooperate at all. So it was almost got to a point where taking a photo was ruining the find for me. Like, I'd find a nice animal and I'd go, now I have to photograph it.
Yeah, you just want to enjoy the moment.
Yeah, and by the end, you're just sick of the animal. Just cooperate. Do what you're meant to do. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, that is awesome. And so This was a great chat. Is there anything that we didn't cover today that you guys wanted to mention before we wrapped up? I think we covered most things.
No, I think we've covered most things. Yeah. I think the biggest thing I put out there is if people want to have a go at building enclosures, just do it.
Yeah.
Don't even think about it. Don't think, I can't do this. Just have a go.
Yeah.
Better.
And we all started off crap.
No one's an expert to start with.
You're not going to build something that looks like one of ours on your first go.
Exactly.
But that doesn't matter. Just get in there and have a go, and it'll progress, as you get more experience. And just the difference in animals when you start researching habitat and trying to provide all those different, requirements that we've really thought before and never aren't necessary for them, like UV, changing the heat source over, so they're definitely getting that sort of sunlight mimiccing heat source instead of underbelly heat and those sort of things makes a huge difference. And
I think people should research the animals that they're actually keeping. Like, look at where they're found in the wild. Just as simple as Googling it. Just Google where it's found, have a look at its habitat, try and replicate that. Look at the temperatures where the animal's found. I know you can't always get the exact temperatures from where that animal's exactly found, but it gives you a general idea of just how hot and how cold it gets and the microclimates that they're dealing with a lot of the time as well. Like, that's helped me greatly with keeping a lot of species, especially breeding some of the more difficult species, is just replicating that environment where they've come from and those temperature shifts and rainfall shifts as well.
Yeah, that's huge. And I really like that idea of, you guys are doing this with actually going out and taking photos, but you can do this on Google, is look at the natural habitat and then find something that you like and just try to create that. It's almost like tracing, like find something that you like and print it out.
And print out a photo and stick it there and try and copy it.
Yeah,
it's exactly. All I did to start with. I was just copying photos that I'd taken and trying to just make it look similar to how it was. We still do that. We still print out. Yeah. I mean, I always print out a pile of different reference photos and just have them plastered around the enclosure that I'm working on so that I can just keep looking at different things.
Yeah. I think that in itself is a huge tip. I think many people don't do that because you're just trying to shove stuff in and you don't know what you're doing. So that is awesome. Can you guys let everybody know where they can find you online, the YouTube channel as well as the respective Instagram accounts?
Yeah, so it's just the Natural Herp Keeper on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. So you can jump on any of those and find our DIY videos or links to them. All of our herping photos and stuff go up there as well. And if we have any animals available as well, they're usually up on the Facebook site.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, Kristy, Matt, thank you so much for this conversation. I'm looking at the clock. I can't believe we're already over an hour and this conversation flew by. So thank you so much. This was an absolute pleasure.
That was great.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, that is the end of that episode. Matt and Kristy, thank you so much for joining me. I think we all pulled a ton of information from that conversation, and I know that hopefully this will send more people over to your YouTube channel so they can learn some of that fake rock work. As soon as I move, some of you know that I'm in the process of moving in the next couple of months. I think that'll be one of my first projects, is working on a fake background or a fake rock background, because I definitely want to give it a shot. I just can't do it in this apartment. I'm going to make too much of a mess. So thank you so much for joining me. Listeners, thank you so much for listening. As always, if you do want to find more information on the episode, head to animalsathomenetwork.com. There you'll find links to the show notes. And if you want to join us on Patreon, you can head to patreon.com/animalsathome. There you have early access to the episodes, and you also have access to the early guests. So I will submit what guests are coming up, and you can submit questions for the guests that are going to be in the next coming up episodes. So if you want to actually interact with the guests that are on the podcast, that is the way to do that. And thank you so much to CustomReptileHabitats.com for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. If you are in the market for some new reptile equipment, definitely go check them out. You don't have to buy anything, but I do recommend going to check out their website. If you do use the link in the YouTube description or on the show notes page, that is an affiliate link. So if you do make a purchase, a small commission does come back to me at no extra cost to you, which of course helps support the show and keeps the lights on in this room and keeps the recording devices on the computer so we can listen to the podcast. I think that's it. Thank you guys so much for listening to the episode, and I will catch you guys next week.